The heart monitor was still beeping a steady rhythm, proving that her son was alive, but inside Sandra felt like she had just died. Most women hold their husbands' hands after giving birth. She was holding a pen. The ink on her son's birth certificate wasn't even dry when her mother-in-law, Beatrice, threw a manila envelope onto the hospital tray. "Sign it, you leech," she spat. "Mark is done with you." Sandra looked at her husband, the father of the child in her arms, hoping for defense. He just looked away. They thought they were discarding a poor, helpless orphan. They didn't know they were declaring war on the wealthiest woman in the country. The smell of antiseptic in room 402 of St. Mary's Hospital was overwhelming, but it wasn't enough to mask the scent of expensive, cloying perfume that had just wafted in. Sandra Sterling shifted uncomfortably in the hospital bed. Her body ached in ways she hadn't known were possible. It had been only 6 hours since she had delivered Leo, a tiny, red-faced bundle currently sleeping in the plastic bassinet beside her. She was exhausted, her hair plastered to her forehead, her hospital gown flimsy and cold. She smiled weakly as the door pushed open, expecting to see Mark, her husband of 2 years. He had stepped out to get coffee while she was in labor and hadn't come back for the actual birth. Mark did walk in, but he wasn't holding flowers, and he wasn't holding a teddy bear. He was holding his hands behind his back, looking at the floor tiles as if they were the most fascinating things on earth. Behind him marched Beatrice Sterling, his mother. Beatrice was a woman who wore her insecurities like armor, mostly in the form of gaudy gold jewelry and a fur coat that was inappropriate for June. "Mark?" Sandra whispered, her throat dry. "Come see him. He looks just like you." Mark flinched. He took a step forward, but Beatrice shot out an arm, barring his path like a gatekeeper to a fortress he wasn't allowed to enter. "He doesn't need to see it," Beatrice snapped. Her voice was sharp, like glass breaking in a sink. Sandra blinked, confusion clouding her tired mind. "It? Beatrice, he's your grandson." "He is a mistake," Beatrice declared, marching to the bedside. She looked down at Sandra not with compassion, but with the sneer one reserves for a stain on a silk rug. And so was this marriage. Beatrice reached into her oversized designer bag, a knockoff, though Sandra had never had the heart to tell her, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She tossed it onto the rolling tray table. It landed with a heavy slap next to the pitcher of ice water. "What is this?" Sandra asked, her hand instinctively going to the bassinet to protect Leo. "Divorce papers," Mark said. His voice was quiet, pathetic. He finally looked up, his eyes watery, but lacking any real strength. "I'm sorry, Sandra. It's not working." Sandra stared at him. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the hum of the HVAC system. "Not working?" "Mark, I just pushed a human being out of my body. Your son. We're a family." "We were never a family," Beatrice interjected, her voice rising. "Mark was a fool. He married a waitress, a nobody with no parents, no connections, and, let's be honest, no class. We tolerated you, Sandra. We thought maybe you'd be useful. Maybe you'd keep the house clean, cook decent meals. But look at you." Beatrice gestured vaguely at the hospital room. "You're a drain. The hospital bills alone are going to cost a fortune. Sterling Logistics is a respectable company. We are on the verge of a massive merger, and we can't have Mark dragging around a dead weight." Sandra felt a cold chill settle in her chest, replacing the warmth of new motherhood. "Sterling Logistics is barely breaking even, Beatrice. I did the books last month." "You're in debt." Beatrice's face turned a shade of violent red. "You shut your mouth. That is none of your business anymore. And you know why? Because Mark has found someone who can actually help this family. Someone with status." The door opened again. The click of high heels on the linoleum floor was sharp and rhythmic. In walked Jessica Thorne. Sandra knew Jessica. Everyone in their small social circle knew Jessica. She was the daughter of a local real estate developer. She was loud, flashy, and had been eyeing Mark since high school. She was wearing a white dress that looked pristine, a stark contrast to Sandra's hospital gown. "Hi, sweetie," Jessica cooed, walking right past Sandra to link arms with Mark. She rested her head on his shoulder. "Did you tell her yet?" Mark nodded, looking relieved that someone else was taking charge. "Mark," Sandra said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and shock. "You are leaving me, for her, now? Today?" "It's better this way," Jessica said, answering for him. She looked at Sandra with pitying eyes that held zero warmth. "Mark needs a partner, Sandra. My daddy is going to invest $2 million into Sterling Logistics once the ring is on my finger. What can you offer him? Leftover tips from the diner?" "I gave him a son," Sandra said, her voice hardening. "A liability," Beatrice corrected. "Mark doesn't want custody. You can keep the brat. Consider it your severance package." Beatrice tapped a long, manicured fingernail on the envelope. "Sign the papers, Sandra. We're being generous. We're letting you keep your old car, and we won't sue you for the emotional distress you've caused Mark with your incompetence." "Emotional distress?" Sandra laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "I worked double shifts while pregnant to pay for the warehouse repairs last month." "Lies!" Beatrice shrieked. "Just sign it! If you don't, I will make sure you never work in this town again. I know people, Sandra. I can make your life very difficult." Sandra looked at the three of them. The troika of greed, she thought. Beatrice, the failed matriarch desperate for status. Mark, the spineless prince. And Jessica, the vulture with a checkbook. They saw a tired, broken woman. They saw a waitress who came from nowhere. Sandra closed her eyes for a second. She took a deep breath. When she opened them, the tears were gone. Her eyes, usually a soft hazel, seemed to darken, turning into hard flint. "You want a divorce?" Sandra asked calmly. "Yes," Mark squeaked. "And you want nothing to do with Leo? You're waiving all parental rights?" "I'm not ready to be a father," Mark mumbled, nuzzling into Jessica's hair. "Jessica and I want to travel first." "Fine," Sandra said. She reached for the pen, sitting on the tray. "Just like that?" Beatrice looked suspicious. She had expected begging. She had wanted Sandra to crawl. "Just like that," Sandra said. "On one condition." "You're in no position to make demands," Jessica sneered. "I want you to leave. Now. As soon as I sign this, you walk out that door and you never contact me again. If I see you, if you try to speak to me, I'll call the police for harassment." "Gladly," Beatrice scoffed. Sandra signed the papers. Her signature was elegant, sweeping, a signature that didn't look like it belonged to a waitress. It looked like it belonged on a banknote. She shoved the papers toward Beatrice. "Get out!" Beatrice snatched them up, checking the signature with a greedy grin. "Good riddance. Come on, Mark. Let's go celebrate. I booked a table at Le Monde." Mark cast one last, fleeing glance at the bassinet, then turned his back on his wife and child. They left the room, their laughter echoing down the hallway. Sandra sat in silence for exactly 10 seconds. Then, she reached for the phone on the bedside table. She didn't dial her boss at the diner. She didn't dial a friend. She dialed a number from memory. A number that went directly to a private office in Manhattan, 3 states away. "Arthur," she said into the receiver. Her voice was no longer the voice of a tired mother. It was the voice of a CEO. "Miss Vance?" The voice on the other end was clipped, British, and sounded shocked. "Is that you? We haven't heard from you in 2 years. The board is." "The experiment is over, Arthur." Sandra cut him off. "I'm done playing ordinary. Bring the car. And bring the legal team. I have a company to dismantle." Discharge day was usually a happy occasion. Fathers carried car seats. Mothers held flowers. Sandra walked out of the hospital sliding doors alone, carrying Leo in one arm and a small, battered duffel bag in the other. It was raining, a gray, miserable drizzle that soaked through her thin cardigan instantly. She stood on the curb, watching the happy families load into their SUVs. She looked like a tragedy, a single mom, abandoned, waiting for a bus that might not come. Across the street, a black sedan was parked. Not just a sedan, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, sleek and menacing, looking like a shark in a pool of minnows. It was out of place in this mid-sized, suburban hospital parking lot. People walked by, staring at it, whispering, wondering what celebrity or politician was in town. The driver's door opened. A man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped out. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and posture so straight it looked painful. He opened a large black umbrella and walked across the street, ignoring the puddles, splashing his polished Oxfords. He stopped in front of Sandra. "You look terrible, Miss Vance," he said, though his eyes were warm. "It's Mrs. Sterling. For about another 24 hours, Arthur." Sandra corrected, shifting Leo's weight. "Actually, make that, Miss Vance. I prefer it." "As do I," Arthur said. He held the umbrella over her, shielding the baby from the rain. "The jet is waiting at the private airfield. Your penthouse has been prepped. The nursery staff you requested is on standby." Sandra looked down at Leo. He was sleeping soundly, unaware that his net worth had just jumped from 0 to billions. "And the file?" Sandra asked. "Assembled," Arthur replied. "We've done a preliminary audit of Sterling Logistics, based on the public records and the insider information you provided over the last few months." Sandra smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. "They think I was doing their bookkeeping for free to be a good wife. I was just gathering evidence." "I took the liberty of looking into this, Jessica Thorne," Arthur added as he guided her toward the car. "Her father's wealth is largely leveraged. He's liquidating assets to pay for this investment in the Sterling family. It seems everyone is betting on money they don't have." "Perfect," Sandra whispered. As they reached the Rolls-Royce, the back door was opened by a second guard. Sandra slid onto the plush leather seats. The interior smelled of expensive mahogany and fresh leather, a stark cry from the smell of stale beer and cheap cologne that permeated Mark's pickup truck. She settled Leo into the custom-installed, top-of-the-line car seat Arthur had ready. "Arthur," she said as the car purred to life, silencing the noise of the rain outside. "Yes, ma'am?" "I want to buy the bank that holds the mortgage on the Sterling house, and I want to buy the suppliers for Sterling Logistics." Arthur looked at her through the rear-view mirror. "That is a very aggressive strategy for a Tuesday morning." "I'm feeling aggressive," Sandra said, leaning back and closing her eyes. "They said I was a parasite. They said I was a nobody. I want to show them what happens when a nobody owns everything they touch." The car pulled away from the curb, gliding seamlessly into traffic. Back inside the hospital, a nurse watched from the window. She had been about to run out and tell the poor woman she forgot her prescription. She dropped the pill bottle, her jaw hanging open. "Did that waitress just get into a Rolls-Royce?" she muttered to herself. Meanwhile, across town at Le Monde, the most pretentious French restaurant in the city, corks were popping. Beatrice Sterling held up a glass of champagne. "To Mark, and to a future without dead weight." "To the future," Jessica squealed, clinking her glass against Mark's. Mark smiled, but he looked distracted. He kept checking his phone. "What is it, darling?" Jessica asked, pouting. "Are you missing the milkmaid?" No, Mark said quickly. "It's just the supplier for our trucking fleet. They just sent me an email. They're canceling our contract effective immediately." "What?" Beatrice frowned, lowering her glass. "Why?" Mark squinted at the screen. "It says, new management direction. That's impossible. We've been with them for 10 years. Ignore it." Jessica waved a hand dismissively. "My daddy will fix it. Once his money hits your account, you can buy your own trucks. Don't let business ruin our celebration. You're free, Mark. No more crying baby, no more poor wife." Beatrice nodded, her greed overpowering her business sense. "She's right. Focus on the wedding, Mark. We need to make sure everyone who is anyone is invited. We need to show the world that the Sterlings are moving up." Mark put the phone down, pushing the worry away. "You're right." "To us." They drank their champagne, laughing, completely unaware that the ground beneath them had already begun to crumble. 300 miles away, in a glass skyscraper that pierced the clouds of New York City, Sandra Vance walked into the boardroom of Vance Global. She was still wearing her maternity clothes, but she had showered and pulled her hair back into a severe bun. 12 men in expensive suits stood up immediately. "Welcome back, chairwoman," the man at the head of the table said. Sandra sat at the head of the table. She placed a photo of Mark and Beatrice in the center of the mahogany surface. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice steady, "we are going to acquire a small logistics company in Ohio, and we are going to do it in a way that leaves nothing behind but dust." "Is this a hostile takeover?" one of the board members asked. Sandra looked at the photo of Mark, the man who hadn't held his son. "No," she said, "this isn't business. It's an execution." 1 month later. The Sterling household was in a frenzy. The wedding of Mark Sterling and Jessica Thorne was set to be the social event of the season in their mid-sized Ohio town. Beatrice was in her element. She was barking orders at the florists, terrorizing the caterers, and spending money she didn't technically have yet. Jessica's father transfers the funds the day of the wedding, Beatrice reminded Mark over breakfast. "So we just put everything on credit until then. It's fine. It's an investment." Mark looked tired. "Mom, the business is... It's weird lately." "Weird how?" "We're losing contracts, left and right. The tire supplier, the fuel depot, even the janitorial service for the warehouse, they all dropped us." "People are jealous," Beatrice sniffed. "They know you're marrying into the Thorne family. They're trying to squeeze you. Ignore them." The doorbell rang. "That must be the dress." Beatrice clapped her hands. Jessica ordered a custom gown from Paris. Mark went to the door. It wasn't a dress. It was a process server. "Mark Sterling?" the man asked. "Yes?" "You've been served." He handed Mark a thick stack of papers. Mark frowned, flipping through them. "What is this? Child support?" He expected Sandra to come begging for $50 a week. He scanned the document. His eyes widened. "What is it?" Beatrice asked, coming up behind him. "It's not a request for money," Mark whispered, his face pale. "It's a lawsuit?" "No, it's a notice of foreclosure." "Foreclosure?" Beatrice shrieked. "On the house? Impossible! We pay the mortgage to First National Bank." "Not anymore." Mark read the fine print. "The mortgage was sold to a holding company called Leo Ventures." "Leo Ventures?" Beatrice scoffed. "Never heard of them." "Call the lawyer. Tell them it's a mistake." Mark kept reading. "And there's more. Beatrice, they're calling in the business loans too. Sterling Logistics owes $400,000 immediately, or they seize the trucks." "Who is doing this?" Beatrice screamed, grabbing the papers. "Who is Leo Ventures?" Just then, the TV in the living room, which had been playing the morning news, cut to a breaking business segment. In a shocking turn of events on Wall Street, the anchor announced, Vance Global, the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, has announced a new charitable initiative for single mothers. This comes as the elusive heiress, Sandra Vance, makes her first public appearance in 3 years. Beatrice ignored the TV. "Turn that off. We need to focus." But Mark was staring at the screen. "Mom, look!" On the screen, a woman was walking up to a podium. She was wearing a red power suit that cost more than the Sterling's house. She looked radiant, powerful, and terrifyingly beautiful. She was holding a baby. "Thank you," the woman on the screen said. "It feels good to be back." I took some time away to understand the struggles of the everyday person. I lived among them. I worked as a waitress. I saw how cruel the world can be to those with nothing. Beatrice froze. The voice. She knew that voice. She slowly turned to the TV. The woman on the screen looked directly into the camera. The chyron beneath her read, Sandra Vance, CEO, Vance Global. Net worth, $14 billion. It was Sandra. Beatrice dropped the foreclosure papers. "No," she whispered. That's the waitress. That's the parasite." On the screen, a reporter shouted a question. "Ms. Vance? Is it true you were married during your hiatus?" Sandra smiled. It was the same cold smile she had given them in the hospital. "Briefly. I was conducting a social experiment. I wanted to see if people could love me for me, not my money. Unfortunately, I found that some people are simply morally bankrupt. And now, I plan to teach them a lesson in economics." Mark dropped to his knees. She's Sandra Vance? The Vance Hotel chain? The Vance Tech Group?" "We divorced a billionaire," Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling. "We handed divorce papers to a billionaire." Mark's phone rang. It was Jessica. "Mark!" Jessica was screaming. "Turn on the TV. Tell me that isn't your ex-wife. Tell me you didn't just dump the richest woman in America for M.E." Mark couldn't speak. He looked at the foreclosure papers in his hand. "Leo Ventures." "Leo?" Mark whispered. "My son's name is Leo." The silence in the Sterling living room was broken by the sound of a ceramic vase shattering against the wall. Jessica Thorne stood panting, her chest heaving, her manicured hands clenched into fists. The shards of Beatrice's favorite antique vase, a fake Ming Dynasty she swore was real, lay scattered across the carpet. "You idiot!" Jessica screamed, turning on Mark. "You absolute, monumental idiot!" Mark sat on the sofa, his head in his hands. The news report was still playing on a loop in his mind. Sandra Vance, $14 billion. "Jessica, please," Mark stammered, looking up with bloodshot eyes. "I didn't know. How could I know? She wore thrift store clothes. She drove a 2010 Honda Civic." "That's called old money, you moron," Jessica shrieked. "Rich people don't need to flash it like her." She pointed a trembling finger at Beatrice. Beatrice, usually the alpha in the room, looked small. She was clutching her pearls, her face pale. "Don't speak to me like that, Jessica. We are still the Sterlings. We still have the logistics company." "You have nothing," Jessica yelled. "I just got a text from my dad. He saw the news. He's pulling the investment. He's not putting $2 million into a company owned by the ex-husband of Sandra Vance. Do you know what kind of enemy she is? She could crush my dad's real estate business with a sneeze." "He can't pull out," Beatrice gasped. "We've already spent the deposit on the wedding venue, on the catering." "There is no wedding!" Jessica ripped the diamond engagement ring off her finger. It wasn't the massive rock she wanted. Mark had promised to upgrade it later, but she threw it at him with the force of a bullet. It bounced off his forehead. "I am not marrying the man who dumped a billionaire for me. Do you know what I look like now? I look like the downgrade. I'm the cheap version." "Jessica, wait!" Mark scrambled up, trying to grab her arm. "Don't touch me!" She shoved him away. "I'm going to go find a lawyer. Maybe I can sue you for wasting my prime years." She stormed out, slamming the front door so hard the windows rattled. Mark and Beatrice stood in the silence of their crumbling empire. "She'll come back," Beatrice said, though her voice lacked conviction. "She's just emotional." "Mom," Mark said, his voice cracking. "She's right. We're ruined. The foreclosure, the business loans. Sandra owns it all. She's going to take everything." Beatrice's eyes narrowed. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a desperate, scheming glimmer. "No, she won't." "Why wouldn't she? We treated her like garbage." "Because she's a mother," Beatrice said, smoothing her skirt. "And she loved you, Mark. She loved you so much she lived in poverty just to be with you. You don't turn that off overnight. This TV stunt, this foreclosure, it's just a tantrum. She's hurting. She wants you to fight for her." Mark looked at his mother incredulously. "She's a billionaire CEO, Mom. She's not throwing a tantrum. She's executing a hostile takeover of my life." "Nonsense," Beatrice scoffed. walking to the mirror and fixing her hair. "We need to go to her. We need to see the baby. Once she sees you holding Leo, her son, your son, she'll melt. We'll apologize, blame the stress of the business, maybe blame Jessica for seducing you. We'll say you were confused. You want me to lie to her?" "I want you to get my house back," Beatrice snapped. "Get up, put on your best suit. We're going to New York." The drive to New York took 5 hours because the repo man had come from Mark's truck 20 minutes after Jessica left. They had to take Beatrice's aging sedan, which lacked air conditioning. By the time they reached the gleaming glass spire of Vance Tower in Manhattan, they were sweaty, wrinkled, and irritable. They walked into the lobby. It was like entering a cathedral of capitalism. The ceilings were 40 feet high, the floors were marble, and a waterfall cascaded down one wall. Beatrice marched up to the reception desk. The receptionist, a young woman with glasses, looked up. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Beatrice said, lifting her chin. "We are here to see Sandra Vance. Tell her it's her husband and mother-in-law." The receptionist didn't blink. She typed something into her computer. "I see a Mark Sterling and Beatrice Sterling on the Do Not Admit list. Security?" 2 large men in dark suits materialized from the shadows. "Wait!" Mark cried out. "There's a mistake. We're family. We have a child together." "Mr. Sterling," one of the guards said, his voice deep and rumbling. "Ms. Vance has strict protocols. You have no appointment." "Call her!" Beatrice screamed, causing people in the lobby to turn and stare. "Tell her Beatrice is here. She'll want to see me." The elevator doors at the far end of the lobby pinged open. A group of executives walked out. In the center, surrounded by assistants, was Sandra. She looked breathtaking. She wore a cream-colored business dress that looked tailored by angels. She was laughing at something a handsome man next to her, Arthur, the man from the Rolls-Royce, had said. "Sandra!" Mark shouted, breaking free from the guard's grip. He ran across the lobby. "Sandra!" Sandra stopped. The laughter died instantly. The executives around her parted, forming a protective semicircle. She looked at Mark as he skidded to a halt 10 feet away, blocked by Arthur, who stepped in front of her. "Mark," Sandra said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was bored. "I assume you received the paperwork." "Sandra, please," Mark panted. "We need to talk. The house, the business. You can't do this." Beatrice caught up, huffing and puffing. "Sandra, darling, look at you. You look expensive. I always knew you had style deep down." Sandra raised an eyebrow. "You told me I looked like a cheap waitress the last time we spoke, Beatrice." "Oh, temper's flaring." Beatrice waved a hand dismissively. "We were stressed. But look, we're here now. We want to see Leo. Mark wants to be a father." Sandra signaled to Arthur. He handed her a file. "Mark," Sandra said, opening the folder. "According to the divorce papers you signed and the affidavit you swore to in the hospital, you stated that you had no interest in the child and that he was a liability. You waived all rights." "I was under duress," Mark lied. "Jessica made me." "Jessica," Sandra mused. "Yes, I heard she left you. Smart girl. Opportunistic, but smart." "Sandra, I still love you," Mark said, trying to use the puppy dog eyes that had worked on her in the diner 3 years ago. "We can fix this. I can help you run all of this." He gestured around the lobby. Sandra laughed. It was a genuine laugh, but it was sharp. "Mark, you couldn't run a logistics company with 3 trucks. You think you can run a global conglomerate?" "I didn't marry you because I needed help. I married you because I wanted love. And I found out that your love has a price tag." She closed the folder. "I'm late for a board meeting. Security, remove them. And if they return, have them arrested for trespassing." "You can't do this!" Beatrice shrieked as the guards grabbed her arms. "I'm your grandmother-in-law. I deserve respect." Sandra turned her back on them. Over her shoulder, she said, "You're right, Beatrice. You deserve exactly what you gave me. Nothing." As they were dragged out of the lobby, Mark saw the handsome man, Arthur, lean in and whisper to Sandra. Sandra smiled and placed a hand on Arthur's arm. The glass doors slammed shut, leaving Mark and Beatrice on the hot New York sidewalk. "This isn't over," Beatrice hissed, smoothing her rumpled dress. "She wants a war? We'll give her a war. We just need a lawyer." "With what money?" Mark asked, defeated. "We have one asset left," Beatrice said, her eyes gleaming with malice. "The press. If we can't have her money, we'll destroy her reputation. The world loves a billionaire, but they love a scandal even more." 2 weeks later. Sandra stood on the balcony of her penthouse, overlooking Central Park. Leo was strapped to her chest in a baby carrier made of organic silk. "They're going to be there tonight, aren't they?" she asked without turning around. Arthur stood in the doorway, holding a tablet. "Yes." Beatrice sold an exclusive interview to a tabloid yesterday for $5,000. She used the money to buy 2 tickets to the Metro Charity Gala. "She plans to confront you on the red carpet." Sandra stroked Leo's soft hair. $5,000. She sold her dignity for pocket change. "The tabloid story is vicious," Arthur warned. "She claims you trapped Mark, that you were secretly laughing at their poverty, and that you stole the baby and fled." "Let them print it," Sandra said calmly. "It won't matter after tonight." "Are you sure you want to do this, Sandra? It's public. It's messy." Sandra turned. Her eyes were fierce. "They humiliated me when I was at my most vulnerable, Arthur. They tried to discard me and my son like trash. I don't just want to win. I want to make sure they can never hurt anyone else again." "Very well," Arthur nodded. "The audio setup is ready." The Metro Charity Gala was the highlight of the New York social calendar. Politicians, movie stars, and tycoons mingled under the chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel. Beatrice and Mark arrived in a rented limo. Beatrice was wearing a dress that was 10 years out of style, and Mark looked like he was walking to the gallows. "Remember the plan?" Beatrice whispered to him as they approached the red carpet. "We cause a scene. We scream that she stole your son. The cameras will love it. She'll have to settle with us to make us go away. We'll ask for $50 million. "I feel sick," Mark muttered. "Swallow it," Beatrice hissed. They bypassed the press line and headed straight for the ballroom entrance. The security guard checked their tickets. They were valid. Beatrice smirked. Inside, the room was buzzing. At the center of the room, on a raised dais, sat Sandra. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet, diamonds dripping from her neck. She was holding court with the mayor of New York. Beatrice grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and downed it in one gulp. "Showtime." She grabbed Mark's hand and began to push through the crowd. Excuse me, mother of the victim coming through." The crowd parted, confused. Beatrice marched right up to the dais. "Sandra!" she screamed. The room went silent. The orchestra stopped playing. Sandra looked down from the dais. She didn't look surprised. She looked like a predator watching a mouse enter the trap. "Beatrice!" Sandra said into the microphone that was already set up for her speech. Her voice boomed across the ballroom. "I didn't think you could afford a ticket." "Don't play coy with me," Beatrice yelled, playing to the cameras that were now swinging toward them. "You stole my grandson! You lied to my son! You pretended to be poor to trick him!" A gasp went through the crowd. "Trick him into what?" Sandra asked calmly. "Into marrying a waitress? Into living in a 2-bedroom house with a leaky roof?" "You mocked us," Beatrice pointed a shaking finger. "You sat on your billions while we struggled, and then you kidnapped Leo." Mark stepped forward, trying to look like a grieving father. "Sandra, I just want to see my son. How could you keep him from me?" Sandra stood up. She picked up a remote control from the podium. "I expected this," Sandra said to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, my former in-laws are accusing me of deception. They claim they are the victims. They claim they want to be a family." She pressed a button. A massive screen behind the stage flickered to life. It wasn't a video. It was an audio waveform. This recording was taken in St. Mary's Hospital, room 402, on June 14th, Sandra announced. "The day my son was born." Beatrice froze. The audio began to play. The quality was crystal clear. He is a mistake." Beatrice's voice rang out through the speakers, magnified 10 times. "And so was this marriage." The crowd murmured. "Mark doesn't want custody." "You can keep the brat. Consider it your severance package." The recording continued. Beatrice's face went white. She looked around the room. People were looking at her with disgust. Then Mark's voice came on. "I'm not ready to be a father. Jessica and I want to travel first." Then came the kicker. Beatrice's voice again. "The hospital bills alone are going to cost a fortune. We can't have Mark dragging around a dead weight." Sandra paused the recording. "Dead weight," Sandra repeated into the microphone. "That is what you called your grandson. Because you thought I was poor. You didn't hate me because I was a bad person, Beatrice. You hated me because I didn't have money." Sandra stepped down from the dais, walking slowly toward them. The crowd parted for her, leaving Mark and Beatrice isolated in the center of the floor. "And now that you know I have money," Sandra said, stopping inches from Mark's face, "suddenly you want to be a father? Suddenly you love me?" "Sandra, we were angry," Mark stammered, sweat pouring down his face. "No," Sandra said, "you were honest. For the first time in your life, you showed your true colors. You traded your wife and child for a check from Jessica Thorne's father. A check that never cleared." Sandra turned to the crowd. "These people are not victims. They're gold diggers who dug in the wrong spot." She turned back to Beatrice. "In regarding your financial situation," Beatrice was trembling. "What?" "I know you took out a second mortgage on your house to pay the business debts last week," Sandra said. "A high-interest loan from a private lender? How do you know that?" "Because I own the lending company," Sandra smiled. "I bought the note this morning, and I'm calling it in." "You have 24 hours to vacate the property, Beatrice." "You can't," Beatrice screamed, falling to her knees. "It's my home. I've lived there for 30 years. "Then you shouldn't have betted against a billionaire," Sandra said coldly. Sandra snapped her fingers. 2 security guards stepped forward. "Get them out of my sight!" As Mark and Beatrice were dragged away for the second time, this time in front of the entire elite of New York City, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't polite applause. It was a standing ovation for Sandra. Mark looked back, tears streaming down his face. "Sandra, please! I have nowhere to go." Sandra didn't even look at him. She turned to the mayor. "Shall we continue with the auction? I believe we have money to raise for mothers who actually care about their children." Outside the hotel, it was raining again. Beatrice sat on the curb, her expensive dress ruined by the wet pavement. She held her head in her hands. "She took the house," Beatrice sobbed. "She took the business. She took our reputation." Mark stood over her, looking at the city lights reflecting in the puddles. He had lost Jessica. He had lost Sandra. He had lost his son. "We did this," Mark whispered. The realization finally hit him, heavy and crushing. "We did this to ourselves." "Shut up," Beatrice snapped, though her voice was weak. "We just need a plan. We can sue for defamation." "Give it up, Mom," Mark said. He started walking away into the rain. "Where are you going?" Beatrice cried. "To find a job," Mark said without looking back. "I hear the diner is hiring dishwashers." The winters in Ohio had always been cold, but for Mark Sterling, this winter felt like it was seeping into his very marrow. He stood behind the counter of Quick Stop Gas and Lube, wiping grease off his hands with a rag that was dirtier than his fingers. At 32, Mark looked 45. His hairline had receded, his waistline had expanded from a diet of microwave burritos, and his eyes held the permanent, glazed look of a man who had given up. "Hey, pump 4 is jammed again," a customer shouted from the doorway. "I'm coming," Mark grumbled. He zipped up his thin jacket. The zipper was broken, so he had to hold it shut and walked out into the biting wind. As he kicked the pump, trying to get the mechanism to engage, a sleek, black SUV pulled up to the premium pump next to him. Mark didn't look up. He learned long ago not to look at the expensive cars. It hurt too much. But then he heard the voice. "Mommy, can I get a hot chocolate?" "Only if you promise not to spill it on your new coat, Leo." Mark froze. The wrench slipped from his hand. clattering onto the concrete. He slowly turned his head. Standing by the SUV was a woman in a camel hair coat that looked softer than anything Mark had ever touched. She was adjusting the scarf on a little boy. The boy was 5 years old. He had dark, curly hair and bright hazel eyes. He looked exactly like Mark did in his childhood photos, but healthier, happier, and dressed in clothes that probably cost more than Mark's monthly rent. It was Sandra. And it was Leo. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He hadn't seen them in 5 years, not since the night at the Plaza Hotel. He had read about them, of course. Beatrice bought every magazine that featured Sandra. He knew Sandra had expanded Vance Global into Europe. He knew she had built schools in South America. He knew she was one of the most powerful women in the world. But seeing them, breathing the same air, it paralyzed him. "Sandra," Mark croaked. The wind whipped his voice away. She didn't hear him. She was laughing as she held the door open for Leo. Mark took a step forward. He had to say something. He had to tell her he was sorry. He had to tell his son who he was. "Excuse me, sir." A voice cut him off. Mark turned to see the driver of the SUV. It was Arthur. The older man hadn't aged a day. He looked at Mark with zero recognition. To Arthur, Mark was just a greasy gas station attendant. "Fill it with premium," Arthur said, handing Mark a credit card. "And clean the windshield." Mark looked at the card. It was a black titanium card. Vance Global Corporate. Mark's hand trembled as he took it. He wanted to scream, "I'm her husband! I'm that boy's father!" But shame, thick and suffocating, choked him. He looked at his reflection in the tinted window of the SUV. He saw a loser. A man who had abandoned his family for a promise of money that never came. He pumped the gas in silence. He washed the windshield, scrubbing away the dirt so he could see Sandra inside. She was sitting in the back seat, reading a book to Leo. They looked warm, safe, loved. Arthur tapped on the glass. Mark finished up. "Receipt?" Arthur asked. "No," Mark whispered. Arthur drove away. Mark stood in the exhaust fumes, watching the red taillights disappear into the gray afternoon. "Mark, get back inside! You're letting the heat out," his boss yelled. Mark walked back inside. He went to the bathroom and vomited into the sink. That night he took the bus to the outskirts of town, to a dilapidated apartment complex known as The Gardens, though nothing grew there except mold. He unlocked the door to Unit 1B. The smell of stale cigarette smoke and cat food hit him. "Did you bring my medicine?" A voice rasped from the recliner in the corner. Beatrice Sterling was a shadow of her former self. The stress of the bankruptcy and the humiliation had ravaged her. She had gained weight, her hair was gray and thinning, and she spent her days watching reruns of old soap operas and clipping coupons. "I forgot, Ma," Mark said, tossing his keys on the stained Formica table. "You're useless," Beatrice snapped, "just like your father, just like everyone." "I saw them," Mark said quietly. Beatrice paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. "Who?" "Sandra. And the boy. Leo." Beatrice dropped the fork. Her eyes, usually dull, suddenly sharpened with that old, toxic gleam. "Where? Here? In town?" They stopped for gas. They must be visiting the new distribution center Sandra built in the next county. Beatrice struggled out of the chair. "How did he look? Did he look like us?" "He looked like me," Mark said, sitting heavily on the sofa. "But happy." "He's 5, Beatrice muttered, pacing the small room. "Mark, 5 is a crucial age. Children are curious. He'll be asking about his father soon." "Mom, stop." "No, we have rights." Beatrice's voice rose to a shrill shriek. "Grandparents, rights. We can sue for visitation. If we get visitation, she'll have to pay us support. We could get out of this dump. We could get a condo." She destroyed us last time we tried that, Mark said wearily. She has lawyers who cost more than this entire building. We have something she doesn't have, Beatrice said, grinning through her yellowed teeth. We have nothing to lose. A desperate person is dangerous, Mark. We're going to that distribution center tomorrow. I'm not going, Mark said, closing his eyes. You are going! Beatrice grabbed his collar. That boy is my ticket out of here. And he's your son. Do you want him to grow up calling some butler, Daddy? Do you want to die pumping gas? Mark looked at his mother. He saw the madness in her eyes, but he also saw the truth. He was dying pumping gas. This was his last chance to feel like a man. Fine, Mark whispered. We go tomorrow. The dedication ceremony for the Leo Vance Community Center was a grand affair. It was located in the heart of the town where Sandra had once been a waitress, a symbolic gesture of giving back to the place that had tried to crush her. There were balloons, a marching band, and hundreds of townspeople cheering. The press was there, cameras flashing. Sandra stood on a temporary stage in the middle of the park. She was radiant in a white summer dress. Next to her stood Leo, looking a bit shy, but waving at the crowd. And next to Leo stood Arthur, not as a butler, but standing close, his hand resting protectively on Leo's shoulder. Thank you all for coming, Sandra said into the microphone. This center is for the single mothers who work double shifts. It's for the children who need a safe place to dream. It's for the future. The crowd cheered. At the back of the crowd, Mark and Beatrice pushed their way through. They had dressed in their best clothes, which were now threadbare and smelled of mothballs. Get to the front, Beatrice hissed, digging her elbows into people. When the cameras are on her, we rush the stage. We make a scene. We beg for forgiveness. The public loves a redemption arc. Mom, this feels wrong, Mark muttered, seeing the security guards scanning the crowd. Shut up and keep moving. They reached the velvet rope, separating the crowd from the VIP area. A security guard stepped in their path. Invitation? He asked. We're family, Beatrice shouted, loud enough for heads to turn. That's my grandson up there! Leo! Leo, baby! It's Grandma! On stage, Sandra froze. She looked out into the crowd. Her eyes locked onto Beatrice immediately. Leo tugged on Sandra's hand. Mommy, who is that screaming lady? The microphone picked up his question. The crowd went silent. Sandra signaled to the security team to wait. She stepped down from the stage, holding Leo's hand. Arthur walked right beside them. The crowd parted, creating a corridor between the billionaire and the beggars. Sandra stopped 5 feet from the velvet rope. She looked at Mark and Beatrice with an expression that wasn't anger. It was pity. Hello, Beatrice. Mark, Sandra said calmly. Sandra, Beatrice sobbed, throwing herself against the rope. It was a terrible theatrical performance. Oh, thank God. We've missed him so much. Look at him. He's so big. She reached out a grasping hand toward Leo. Leo recoiled, hiding behind Arthur's leg. Mommy, she's scary. Mark stepped forward. He looked at his son. Leo, hey, buddy, you don't know me, but I'm your dad. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Leo peeked out from behind Arthur. He looked at Mark, really looked at him. He saw the grease under the fingernails, the desperate eyes, the weak chin. Then, Leo looked up at Arthur. Arthur, who taught him to ride a bike. Arthur, who read him stories every night. Arthur, who was strong and steady. Leo looked back at Mark and shook his head. No, Leo said clearly. You're not my dad. Arthur is my dad. Mark felt like he had been punched in the gut. The air left his lungs. Beatrice shrieked, He's brainwashed! You brainwashed him! Sandra stepped forward, placing herself between her son and the Sterlings. Her voice was low, but it carried the weight of an executioner's blade. I didn't brainwash him, Beatrice, Sandra said. I simply didn't mention you. You aren't a villain in his story. You aren't a monster. You're just nothing. You're a blank page. I am his father, Mark cried. tears streaming down his face. I gave him life. You gave him DNA, Sandra corrected. Arthur gave him a life. You had your chance, Mark. You held him in that hospital room, and you chose a check from Jessica Thorne. You put a price on his head. And now? You can't afford him. Sandra turned to the security guard. Officer, these people are disturbing the peace. Please escort them away. No, wait! Beatrice screamed as the guards grabbed her. Sandra, have mercy! We're starving! Look at us! Sandra paused. She looked at Beatrice's worn shoes. She looked at Mark's broken zipper. She reached into her purse and pulled out a $20 bill. She walked over and tucked it into Mark's shirt pocket. For the gas, she said. Keep the change. She turned around and walked back to her son. Arthur picked Leo up, swinging him onto his shoulders. Leo laughed, the sound pure and joyful, completely unaffected by the two strangers being dragged away. Mark stood there, clutching the $20. The crowd stared at him. He wasn't a tragic figure. He wasn't a victim. He was just a man who had made a bet against kindness and lost everything. As Sandra, Arthur, and Leo disappeared into the bright lights of the community center, Mark realized the truest hell wasn't being hated. It was being irrelevant. He turned to his mother, who was still screaming obscenities at the sky. Come on, Mom, Mark said, his voice dead. Let's go home. To where? Beatrice wept. We have nothing. I know, Mark said. I know. They walked away into the shadows, while behind them, the celebration of a new life, a life they could have shared, continued, loud and bright, without them. This story is a brutal reminder that character is currency. Mark and Beatrice Sterling thought wealth was measured in bank accounts and designer clothes. They treated Sandra like trash because they couldn't see her value beyond her waitress uniform. In the end, they didn't just lose access to billions of dollars. They lost the privilege of knowing their own blood. They learned the hard way that when you throw people away like garbage, you're the one who eventually ends up in the dump. Karma doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes with the silence of a son who doesn't know your name. Wow, that ending gave me chills. Do you think Mark deserved a second chance, or was Sandra right to cut him off completely? Let me know in the comments. Type Team Sandra if you think she did the right thing. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching.